Okay, so I originally came up with this idea whilst I was researching for my Gojo Infinity video. And whilst I was researching for it, I started to think about other curse techniques in JJK as well. And naturally, projection sorcery came up. So I thought I'd make a quick video sharing my thoughts on the power, because the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it's a really weird power. Okay, so I feel like I don't really need to give an explanation of how this power works, because JJK has been out for a long ass time now. But for the sake of creating a good foundation for what I'm gonna discuss, I'm gonna quickly give one anyways. But of course, if you already know how this power works, then I actually recommend that you skip ahead to this timestamp here. So how this power basically works is that you can basically create a movement and split that movement up into 24 frames. And if you draw out those 24 frames into a movement, you can execute that animation, and then your body will pretty much follow those 24 frame animation that you created for 1 second. Okay, so for example, right, let's say that you created an animation of yourself where you ran for half a second, then you decided to jump for the other half. And if you ended up playing that animation, you'd pretty much run for half a second, then jump for the other half. Now, this doesn't really sound that impressive, right? Because I used a pretty trivial example, but honestly, the ramifications of this are really strong. So, for example, right, you could have an animation where you try to jump over the Burj Khalifa, and you set your start frame to be at the base of the building, and your end frame to be at the base of the building on the other side, and just draw a bunch of frames in between. And if you play that, but now you can jump over the Burj Khalifa. And you could create an animation where you could circle the globe in 1 second as well. If you put your start frame in like China or something, and your end frame in like America, and so you pretty much create an animation where you like, I don't know, probably like supersonic, traveling at supersonic speeds. Okay, so hopefully you can understand why this power is pretty OP. But if you noticed, the examples that I gave are really impressive, right? But the users of this power that we see in the anime, they don't really use it in this way. So Nabito doesn't really travel at supersonic speeds. I can know, I'm not really sure what his top speed is, but I don't think it's like, at the very least, he's not traveling at light speed, right? And he's also not jumping really high. And the reason for that is because there's another requirement of this power, and that is that whatever movement you decide to make and then follow, you have to make sure that that movement does not too egregiously break the laws of physics. Because if it does, then you can't do it. Now, this requirement by itself, honestly, kind of destroys this power a lot, because if you can't really break the laws of physics, then what can you really do with this power? Like, if you think about this in real life, right? Let's say I had this power, what can I do with it? Well, all I can really do is just use this power to become peak human. Because if you think about things that the humans have accomplished, there is a theoretical limit on um, that limit based on like the things we want to do. So, for example, right, there is a theoretical limit on how fast humans can run, and I don't think we have really reached that limit. But I would actually say we are pretty close to the limit. So, for example, right, if you look at the 100-meter dash, there was a article that I found online which pretty much said that the theoretical limit for how fast you can do a 100-meter dash is like 9.48 seconds. And for reference, the fastest a human has done is in Usain Bolt, who could do it in 9.58 seconds. And honestly, if you were to think about, I guess, this in the terms of Olympics, right, running even 0.1 second faster than 9.58 is obviously a big deal, right? But if you want to be like a superhero, right, this is not really that impressive. And you're not really running at like supersonic speeds and anything like that. So this is kind of, it's not really that impressive. But obviously, we're talking about this in terms of fiction, right? And if you look at JJK, they don't actually follow this requirement that stringently. So even though they're supposed to, follow this requirement, and they can't really travel that fast, they kind of do, and they pretty much, and the user of this ability pretty much can do a lot, because this requirement is not really applied that strongly to them. This is why Naruto, who is the current user of this ability in the anime, he can he's the second fastest human, second fastest sorcerer in JJK behind Gojo Satoru. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is this idea of actually creating the animation. So when you see Naruto use his ability, right, he obviously has full control over what kind of animation movement he wants to make, right? And then he follows the animation, and that's all well and good. But you realize it's a bit more complicated than that, because one of the offensive capabilities of this power is that anything that Naruto touches with his palm is also given the power, right? And so what happens is that in this scene here, you can see that Dagon is given this power, but you notice that the animation path that he needs to follow is actually created for him. So how does this work? Like, did the animation get created automatically, or did he create it? And if he created it, then did he have control over the animation that he created? Because if he created it and he had control over it, that implies that the animation part of this power is either easy to use if you created it, or is kind of difficult to master, because maybe when you first get this power, maybe the animations are like maybe they're kind of rogue, and you have to master them and learn how to actually control what the course of the animation that you make are. But anyways, right, that was kind of a small thing I wanted to get out. But the next part is actually kind of related to this, and that is this idea of actually following the animation, and how does that work. So if you go back to Dagon, right, the animation is created for him, and the reason he gets frozen is because of the fact that he wasn't able to actually follow the animation in time. So in frame one, um, so he should be in frame one in 1/24th of a second when the animation, I guess, started, but he wasn't, and that's why he froze. So in that regard, what is actually the mechanism that allows anyone who has this power to actually follow the animation? Is their body snapping in place um, when the animation, I guess, starts? That is intuitively what I feel like should happen, but that's not really the case, because when Dagon gets frozen, I assume that he goes frozen because of the fact that he wasn't in the correct frame at the correct time. So that would imply that you actually have a lot of control over your body, and so maybe you need to actually move your body into those frames and the exact times, like you contorting your body um, into those frames. But that's not really how animation works, because once you make animation, you just press a play button, and then the animation just plays itself, and you can't really do anything. I don't know, it's a bit weird, right? I actually want to know how much control you actually have over yourself when you actually do this. I actually thought of a pretty interesting analogy for how this could work, and I am thinking about it like a roller coaster, where basically you create the course of the roller coaster, so that would be the animation path, and then you basically sit in the roller coaster and let the roller coaster play. But in this case, the roller coaster would need to be in a certain position within the 24 animation increments. So that would equal to, I guess, each frame. So in frame 1 it needs to be here, in frame 2 it needs to be here, and so on. But if you think about it like that, does that mean that you have access to the speed of the roller coaster? And if you go back to Dagon, the reason he froze was because he didn't, I guess, start the roller coaster, or maybe the roller coaster that he was in, the cart was too slow and he wasn't in the correct frame at the correct time. But again, there's also this idea that you can change the course of the roller coaster as well. So how does that work? Can you just willingly change the course, and once that happens, then you freeze? I don't know. I mean, that doesn't really make sense with the roller coaster, right? I guess if you think about it in other terms, maybe you decide to jump off the roller coaster as it's moving, and so that's why you freeze, because you are saying that you don't want to follow the course that is outlined for you, or that you made for yourself, and that's why you froze. I don't know. It's really weird. Normally, animations are pretty much that you play them and then they, you know, get played and you can't do anything about it. But in this case, the thing that's being animated creates the animation, and then it plays the animation, but you have control over the animation that you made, and you need to be in those frames at the exact times. So I don't know. It's a bit weird, right? I feel like I'd be curious to know what the confines of this movement is like. How much control do you actually have over yourself when you do this? But anyways, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I hope you can start to really see why this ability is kind of weird, right? And for the next point, I kind of want to talk about something that I feel like I haven't really seen other people talk about, and that has to do with the number of frames you have access to. And what I want to say is that the number of actions you can perform in 1 second is equal to the number of frames you have access. So when I say action, that pretty much means like any fundamental actions. So maybe like breathing could be an action, running is an action, walking is an action, maybe like punching someone is an action as well, right? And so what I'm trying to say is that you can only ever do at most 24 actions because that is your frame rate. So how that works is that every frame is has one action given to it, right? Okay, so this one is a bit abstract, right? So let me give an example of this. Let's say you're playing a game, and let's say you're playing like Tetris or something, right? And basically, you have a block that's coming down, and you already know where you're gonna put it, and so you need to do a bunch of actions. And let's say your actions are rotate the block once, press right 2 times, and then hold down. And if you do that, you have placed down a block. Now, if you equate every action that I just stated, so press right 2 times, rotate once, and then hold down, as being equal to 1 frame, that pretty much means that it would take you 4 frames to actually put one block down, which pretty much means that you could put one block down in 4 divided by 24, which equals this, and that's really fast, right? And if you then use the rest of the frames as well for other blocks, then what that means is that um, you have pretty much played Tetris very fast. Like you can imagine you have put down like 6 blocks in Tetris um, in 1 second. That's really impressive because you're just playing the game really fast. And also, this is a very practical use of the power as well. But there are some requirements that you need to meet for this to work. So let me go over those requirements. So first of all, and this kind of doesn't really have to do with the power itself, and that is that you need to make sure that the game's frame rate or the playing rate of the frame is in sync with the action animation that you created, because the actions that you pre-planned, you just kind of pressing play and you just button mashing pretty much. So if the game's frame rate or the rate at which the blocks are dropping down is not synced to the actions that you have done, which is pretty much you just pressing a sequence of buttons in a certain order, then it will just look like you're button mashing, right? You won't really accomplish anything. So this one is kind of a soft requirement, right? Because that's not really practical for us. So not practical for us, but it's not really relevant to like Naruto, right? But the next two are a bit more relevant. So the next requirement is that when Nabita uses this ability, he's just kind of he can't really read the future, right? So he's kind of pre-planning his movement and then executing it. So since he can't read the future, he has to make sure that any action that he performs, it doesn't get interrupted. And what that means for the Tetris example is that you kind of already need to know what blocks are gonna come down before you end up actually creating your actions and then executing them. But you obviously don't have that information, and so in that regard, this is actually kind of useless. Maybe actually be useful in other games so you actually have access to future information, right? But probably not in Tetris, right? Okay, so I hope all of them make sense. And the last requirement is actually the one which I think is the most interesting, and that has to do with this idea of in between frames. So if you go back to the Tetris example, right? Let's say that you have animation that you made where you press a bunch of buttons, where you press like I don't know right once, left, down, for each block, right? And that's all pre-planned, and you're just pressing play on that animation. And also, let's also say that each action that you have made is recorded in terms of like swipes on like a touch screen, right? So a right action would equal to just right swipe on the screen, and then a left action would equal just a left swipe on the screen. If you were to do that and you had one action equals 1 frame, and if you play that animation, it would just look like gibberish. It would actually just look like gibberish. It would look like a bunch of dots appearing on the screen and then disappearing in 1 second. It wouldn't make any sense, right? It wouldn't make any sense. And the reason it actually doesn't make any sense is because you actually need to have some transition frames that you're using in between each action to actually show the transition between each action. Now, what I'm saying here isn't really an abstract concept because we actually see it used in the anime when Naruto uses his ability. Like, for example, right, in this scene, you actually see that Naruto is standing, but then he goes from the standing position, which is his first action, to the ducking position, which is here, and then the rest of the frames are used to create animation, sorry, a transition between them. And what that means basically is that you need to basically use your 24 frames or some of your 24 frames to actually create a transition between any actions. And what that means for the Tetris example is that if you want to, have a lot of actions, you also need to use a lot of your frames to actually create those transitions. So even if I were to say, let's say you use like 3 frames for those in between frames, right, which is actually not really much. Let's say you were somehow able to do that, then 24 divided by 3, you only really have access to 8 actions. And if you go back to the example which I provided, where 4 actions equals 1 block, well, then you're only really putting down 2 blocks in 1 second, which again is, I guess, impressive, but it's definitely not as impressive as before. So to fix this, right, if you had access to more frames, maybe like 120 frames, then you could achieve more in that 1 second. Okay, so I've been talking about this in Tetris, right? But what this would practically mean for Nabita would be that if you created a movement where he punched someone, then I don't know, like um, kicked them, and then he ran, and then he ducked down, then he stood up. I don't know, it's like stuff like that, right? If he did all of that within 1 second, each action that he had, he would need to use a lot of frames to actually create a transition between them, and that is why he can't actually perform many actions in 1 second because he actually doesn't have many frames to work with. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, and hopefully you can start to see why this is actually a very interesting ability. And maybe in this 24 frame example, maybe see that this is also a kind of a ability which could be a bit more OP if you had access to more frames. Okay, so there's one more thing I want to talk about, right? And if you actually take what this ability is and how it's basically used, which is to make yourself appear really fast, and also you combine it with this idea that I'm talking about of having a lot of actions within 1 second, which pretty much means that you can do a lot in 1 second, which also pretty much means that you're really fast. This actually sounds like another power, and the power that it sounds like is pretty much a super speed. And what I'm trying to say is that super speed and projection sorcery are practically the same power. If you had super speed and you have also like a fast processing speed as well, and you're really agile, then you can imagine that you can perform a lot of actions within 1 second. So if you go back to the Tetris example, right, let's say the Flash was playing Tetris, and let's also say that the game's frame rate is actually synced to his speed, then he could easily like fill the entire screen with blocks and just um, do a lot in 1 second, right? Like you could say that if you want to draw a parallel between this and projecting sorcery, you could say that he has access to like a million frames, so he can do a lot in 1 second. But at the same time, because he has super speed, he can also do super speed things, which is pretty much run really fast, which is pretty much what projection sorcery is used to do. Now, I would go so far as to say that these are practically the same power, and in 90% of the use case they are pretty much doing the same thing, but one is worded a bit weirdly and the other one is a bit more straightforward. But obviously there are some differences, and the main differences are that super speed doesn't have any drawbacks. So if you mess up, I guess, your animation, right, nothing's gonna happen to you. I guess you would be surprised that the things that you're trying to do don't happen. So maybe you'd be surprised, or maybe someone will ambush you or something like that, which is pretty much what happens in projection sorcery. Something happens that is outside of what you expected will happen, and also obviously you're not gonna freeze for 1 second, but the results are pretty much the same. Now you could even say that one power is actually the subset of another power. So basically, if you don't know what a subset is, if you are comparing apples and fruits, right? Apples are a subset of fruits because every apple is a fruit, but not every fruit is an apple. And so in this case, I would actually say that super speed is actually the subset of projection sorcery, because everything you can do with super speed, you can do with projection sorcery. But I would say there are some things that you can do with projection sorcery that you can't do with super speed. So for example, right, one of these things would be that if you have projection sorcery, you can really contort your body in really weird positions. So I guess you could be really flexible. But if you have super speed, you're not going to be really flexible if you have super speed. That would just depend on how flexible you are. And the second difference would be that with projection sorcery, you could probably jump really high. Now, I'm not really saying that you can't jump really high with super speed, because you probably can, right? But there is a fundamental difference in how that would work. So, if you were to jump with projection sorcery, how that would work is that you just need to create the animation of you jumping, but the amount of distance that you actually travel doesn't really have to be proportional to the amount of work that you put in when you jump. So if you created an animation where you only bend your knees slightly and you jump over a brick, well, with projection sorcery, you could say that jump was strong enough to, like make you jump over a tree. And because of the fact that that's not too egregiously breaking the laws of physics, maybe that is not going to be maybe that's not like a bad thing. But on the other hand, everything you do with super speed has to match the laws of physics exactly, and you can't deviate from that, even not even one bit. Okay, so I just want to quickly clarify something, that whilst I was editing this video, I realized that there is something you can do with super speed that you can't do with projection sorcery, and that would be like phasing through walls. I don't know if you want to count that though, because maybe you want to say that super speed phasing through walls is not really a like in like one of the base parts of super speed, and I think that would be valid, because not every character that has super speed can phase through walls. So yeah, I'm not really sure. I guess it depends on how you want to rationalize it, right? Okay, so there's one more thing that I want to mention, and that is that in super speed, right, the how fast you are, and also I guess how fast you can process things, and how agile you are, and everything related to super speed, all of that would be dependent upon, I guess, where your power comes from. So I guess for the Flash, it'd be like the Speed Force, and if he has more access to the Speed Force, he's faster, right? But if you draw the same parallel, but to that, to projection sorcery, how fast you are, or I guess how powerful you are when using projection sorcery, would actually be dependent on two things. First, it would be dependent upon how egregiously you can break the laws of physics, because if you could break them more, then you would be faster. But it would also be dependent on your frame rate, because if you had access to more frames, then you could accomplish more in 1 second. Okay, so that's all I have to say for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Obviously, this I'm very late to the discussion, because JJK has been out for a while now, and this is something that has been explained to death. So I'm not sure how well this video is gonna do. Also considering that this is a new channel, these are the kind of videos that I'm trying to make on this channel as well. So and I don't really want the analysis to be strictly on anime or anything like that. It would I want it to be varied, so it's like on any topic I feel like talking about. So yeah, if that sounds cool, then that's pretty much the crap content I'm making this channel. So feel free to like and all of that stuff. Okay, so that's all I have to say, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.